doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor.
We look at what institutional investors can bring to align interests, then we can basically see how those resources can pursue the aspirations of the NDC. So Sharon, I'm going to come to you and just ask you just to tell us a little bit more about, the model law and what it solves, just in terms of how it could mobilize private capital at scale and be deployed at speed to support governments. And there is this continuing call for what we're describing as presidential climate investment units. Units where, if there isn't the capacity in the market currently to do large, big and ambitious investments, then perhaps there could be a process where within the President's office, I think that's what you were saying, there could be expertise and a focused unit in addition to everything else that's already happening. It's not one or the other. Perhaps you might just want to tell us a little bit about that. Thanks.
Thank you, Hubert, and good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to just say, Hubert, from my own personal perspective, I've worked as a projects lawyer for over 25 years, worked for governments from Afghanistan to Zimbabwe, and what I've learned along the way is that sometimes what needs to happen is for there to be a change in the legal institutions in order to encourage investment to happen. So not needed in every jurisdiction, but needed quite often across the world. So in terms of my learning, I've seen governments where priority isn't given to climate projects, where there's not the capability or the capacity within the ministries to undertake the procurement. But sometimes it can be the law itself. So when we talk about public and private engaging together, often the blocker is procurement law. And that concern that by having the discussion between government and private sector, that somehow the government is favouring one private sector entity over another. And so from my experience, I'm thinking that if we keep thinking and doing as we've been doing for the last 25 years, that we won't get the investment at speed and at scale that is needed for all the NDC investment that we've heard about today. So lawyers are often thought of as being blockers to things happening. So as you mentioned, Hubert, I do remember a couple of years ago you said to me, Sharon, give me your moonshot in terms of what can we do legally to be helping with the realization of NDCs. So that brought about the model law for institutional investor-public partnerships. It's a combination of a procurement, a PPP instrument. Some countries already have PPP and procurement laws that are good, but they're not administered in a way that would actually help with the fast tracking and at scale opportunities that we need. But some of the thoughts on what governments could think about, Hubert has just touched on this idea of the Climate Procurement Authority, Presidential Investment Authority, we could call it lots of different things. But if we think of what happened during COVID, where there was a need to procure vast amounts of equipment at scale, it was incredible how much procurement actually happened in a very short space of time. Some of that procurement, as we all know from each of our jurisdictions, wasn't the best procurement, but there was some really good procurement, and the good examples were where there was cross-ministerial collaboration in COVID task forces. So if you hold that thought, then think about PPP units that are in country, procurement authorities that are in country, doing fantastic jobs, but they're so busy with doing the, let's call it the business as usual, procurement, that there's not necessarily the availability to be given towards procuring climate projects. Government client I'm working with, talking to them about the procurement of a flood prevention consultant. Now that should be a really easy procurement, something that should be done quickly. It was taking over 18 months for that particular consultant to be procured, and that was because the consultant was in a long line of other consultants which were needed by that government for all sorts of different projects. So the idea of this specialised investment unit could sit within the Office of the President or the Prime Minister or the Ministry of Finance, depends on the jurisdiction. But the key thing is that it's a unit that is tasked with picking up, as Pablo was saying, the NDC 3, the implementation plans, and actually making those plans happen quickly and effectively. So that unit could be staffed by officials from other ministries, there could be secondees from the private sector, but that unit is responsible for everything NDC related, and that includes the implementation of the projects, not just the procurement, but also all the reporting, because governments will have to account to UNFCCC, to their populations in terms of what they are doing in terms of achieving their NDC. So that the presidential or prime ministerial unit sits with that focus of driving the NDC implementation. And then we've heard other speakers just talking about that, how can government engage investors? And really the thought is in looking at the procurement models that are available in jurisdictions and looking at the possibility of having procurements early in the process that are actually the procurements of the investors. So the investors come in as partners to the public sector and actually look at the NDC. There is a mapping of the NDC priorities, because with each NDC priority, there will be different sources of funding, different sources of contracts, different routes of procurement. So it's in mapping out the NDC requirement to what is appropriate from a legal and financing perspective. And so the early investor involvement would be something that would be a procurement process, so there wouldn't be that concern of governments looking to favour particular providers over other investors. It would be about getting the right investor for the right for the NDC project. And so those Hubert's busy talk.
Yes.
Those Hubert were just a couple of thoughts. Yes. Obviously, could keep going and talking
yes.
about other things, but
no,
I
think that's perfect. I think that's very clear. And as we say, as we go into a new round and phase of NDCs, it's not just governments that we have to raise their ambition. We also have to come up with innovative ideas and contribute, wherever we think we can be helpful as it relates to private capital mobilization.
Doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor.